afternoon, everybody. Welcome, and the first item on our agenda is a special session, and in order to do that, I'll entertain a motion. Have a motion to go into a special session. Is there a second? Got a second? Mr. Alshire seconded Mr. Nelson's motion, and any discussion? All in favor of going to special session, please say aye. Any opposed? All right. The item on for a special session is an application permit for the United Way of Washington County to kick off their special fundraising season on September 18th. Yes, would someone like to make a motion?
Mayor and City Council may permit the possession of alcoholic beverages in open containers in the streets, lanes, alleys, sidewalks, parking lots, or public ways of the city during special events upon application or upon its own initiative. Therefore, Mayor and City Council formally approve the possession of alcoholic beverages being beer and wine in the University Plaza for September 18, 2013 for the United Way of Washington County. Kickoff hours of the event are to be 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Metzner and seconded by Mr. Brubaker. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I think we have representatives here.
Oh, yes, please, come on up. Tell us more about this.
This is Lorraine Clements, and this is, I believe, the first time they've done it at University Plaza.
Yes, hi, I'm Lorraine Clements. I've been in Hagerstown for 8 months. I'm the Director of Resource Development, and Melissa Rebold is our Executive Director, and we are trying to have all of our events in the downtown area. I mean, we do serve all of Washington County, but we thought this would be a nice venue for our kickoff. We're very excited about it.
Excellent. Anybody have any questions or comments on council? I think you have our wholehearted support.
Thank you so much.
I would anticipate
Appreciate
you'll
that.
probably get 5 votes when we call for the vote.
Thank you.
We appreciate you always keeping downtown in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you for this. And I know the United Way does all kinds of work all over the county, and we appreciate all the work the United Way does.
Well, we certainly would love all of you to come. So it's 5:37 on the 18th.
All right.
Close by.
That's right.
After work.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. That'll close the special session, and right now we'll go into our work session, the first item of which is a One Maryland Broadband Impact Study. Welcome to the table, Mr. Nicewater. Would you like to introduce your guest?
Yes, I will.
Our guest.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Andrew Cohill, President of Design 9 Incorporated of Blacksburg, Virginia, who was his company was the author of the Broadband Impact Study. Before getting to him, though, let me just go through a real brief recap of what gets us to this point. The One Maryland Broadband Network is a construction project to create a statewide fiber optics network by providing additional fiber optic lines to link existing government and private broadband networks. The total approved budget for this process was $158.4 million, of which $115.2 million was funded through a Recovery Act grant awarded to the State Department of Information Technology back in September of 2010. The goal of this project was to have a network that will connect over 1,000 community anchor institutions. Those were defined as schools, libraries, hospitals, and public safety agencies. They do this by adding more than 1,300 miles of fiber optic cable lines to existing networks in all 24 Maryland jurisdictions. There were several meetings between the state IT staff and representatives of the city and county leading up to a presentation in September of 2011 to Washington County stakeholders on the approved fiber path of this project through Washington County. One of these routes takes the fiber through the west end of Hagerstown to the Professional Arts Building, and then from the Professional Arts Building up Potomac Street to the Department of Social Services. We were also informed that there would be a specific number of strands of this fiber that would be made available to municipalities for private economic development uses. To that end, Washington County commissioned for an impact study to be done by a third-party contractor, Broadband Services, to study the availability of broadband services to our citizens and businesses, to see where the focus should be placed with this new fiber run with the One Maryland network. And that's where Mr. Cohill and Design 9 have become involved. Andrew will go through the presentation that he provided to the county last week. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt, or if you want to hold them till the end, that's fine. One little caveat to all this that does not affect this presentation, but the committee learned about 2-3 months ago that the strands that were to be made available to the municipalities for economic development uses are not going to be made directly available to us. We would have to work through the subcontractor on this project to have those strands made available to us. Then it's basically their decision as to whether that happens or not. That, however, does not affect what we're going to talk about here.
Does the county get a set aside for economic development?
We all have to work through Maryland Broadband, yeah.
Same thing applies to the county.
That's
Same
correct.
Qualification or rules.
That's correct. That's correct. So, Mr. Cohill.
Thank you.
Let me just
Oh,
ask
sure.
one question before we start. The One Broadband, as you said, I think set aside some private use, but didn't state government decide that there was not going to be private use?
You could have it available for private use, but you would have to work through their subcontractor on the project. Originally, it was going to be up to the municipality to decide how that was going to be used. That's no longer the case.
But what's the implication of having to work with their subcontractor?
Having another person having another company in the mix, they may have different plans for it.
And they may also charge for it.
And
That's
right.
what I think they're likely to say is, we're not in the financial position to give out any free fiber. You can pay the same rate as everybody else.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just need
No,
a
it's fine.
clarification on that.
Yep.
Sure.
If you can talk just a little louder, please.
No, sure.
Communications in this room is real bad.
I have just a very short presentation. I want to leave as much time for questions as necessary. Just very quickly, what we were asked to do was to look at what exists now. And as Scott mentioned, the impact of One Maryland Fiber. So we looked at the service providers in the area, the kinds of fiber providers and their pricing, to look at how the city, particularly in the county, compared to other areas in terms of competitiveness with respect to business attraction and retention. We looked at best practice, looked at a number of business plan options, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, and some financial and business models, and how to finance and pay for it, and we also looked at some of the legal and regulatory issues. The area, particularly the city of Hagerstown, has a lot of strategic advantages. We think nationwide there's a trend of particularly professionals and business people and entrepreneurs moving to smaller towns and cities like Hagerstown. But broadband has been an enabler of this trend. There's very clear data that shows that relocation business decisions, both for businesses and for self-employed people and startup business people, that they're choosing to move to areas where affordable high-speed broadband is available. Having excellent recreational activities and a rich history are very important, but they're necessary but not sufficient. One of the things we found that was very interesting is that there's a lot of fiber passing through the county, mostly north to south. It's very difficult and relatively expensive for businesses to connect to it. So one of the things we proposed in our report is we'd actually have what's called a co-location facility or small data center right in the city that would try to bring together all of these independent fiber providers, including the One Maryland fiber, to make this this access to both One Maryland and the other providers much more affordable. And we think from an economic development direction, that would be very, very important, particularly for the downtown area. We actually identified a location just a couple of blocks up the street, and we think that would really make downtown buildings much more valuable if you had fiber, even to just 2 or 3 blocks of the commercial and retail buildings in downtown. Here's some of the competition. Chattanooga's been really interesting. They've gotten a lot of national press over the last couple of years. They claim that they're the first and only city in America with a gig. I can tell you that was really wishful thinking. There's a number of other communities that have made similar investments. I have to give Chattanooga a lot of credit because they recognized that this was going to be potentially a very strong economic advantage, and so they did very, very good marketing, and they've reported that their ability to attract new businesses has really accelerated sharply. In the city and the county here today, when we talk about broadband, you have what I call little broadband, which is on the left. You have DSL and cable modem. What Chattanooga and about 135 other cities have done is invest in new fiber that typically delivers a standard gigabit connection at much lower cost than typical telephone company leased lines or cable modem services. So why would you do this? What's driving other communities? As I've already mentioned, a lot of it is about business attraction and retention. Particularly new businesses. We talk to relocation specialists all the time, and they tell us very consistently that affordable high-speed broadband access is one of the top 3 or 4 criteria when businesses are trying to make a relocation decision. Again, in places like Chattanooga and other communities, we're seeing a class of self-employed business people and in fact work-from-home people that are looking for affordable high-speed broadband. There's a number of companies now. I know of one company that has more than 10,000 people employed nationwide. Every single person works out of their own home with a high-speed broadband connection. They're getting paid typically $15 to $20 an hour. So it's not just about attracting businesses, but also creating new work-from-home opportunities for the middle class. So when we talk about broadband, we're really not just talking about internet access. For us, when we talk about broadband, we're talking about really a digital transportation system. And it's a lot like roads. The way we think about it, communities build roads and maintain roads. They don't own the businesses that use those roads. And so in Hagerstown, what we had today is several digital road systems. You have the telephone digital telecommunications system, you have the Antietam cable system, and you have some independent fiber providers with very few connections. Duplicating network resources just raises the cost of broadband. And so we did one of the little studies we did is we looked at what are the businesses, institutions, and citizens of Hagerstown going to spend over the next 30 years for telecommunications services in today's dollars. There's no smoke and mirrors in that number. It's today's dollars. There's no inflation. There's no price increases. But $1 billion is going to leave the city over the next 30 years just to buy the kinds of services today. So there's plenty of money for broadband. The goal is just to capture a very small percentage, typically 4 to 5%, and you can build the world's best network to every home and business in Hagerstown. So the money's there. You want to change how you choose to spend it by creating some opportunities to do it locally. We talk about broadband. Often it comes down to a number. Is 50 megabits fast enough? Is 100 megabits? The technology requires typically a definition, but you really don't want to get too attached to a number. what you really want to be able to say to a business, particularly if you're one you're trying to attract, is we have as much bandwidth as you need to locate your business here. And the great thing about fiber is that you can continue to increase the capacity without major infrastructure increases. Compared to water or sewer, you get to the point where a water line, a water main, or a sewer main is full. You've got to do a lot of digging. With fiber, you simply swap out the equipment on the ends and increase the capacity. So we really do see fiber as a kind of future-proof technology. So what we actually did a little cost study of what it would take to run fiber in the downtown area, to be able to run short drops to most of the buildings in the downtown area, and we have, our report has a fair amount of detail on how we costed this out, but this is the study we looked at, and I want to emphasize this is just a study area. You could start smaller with just hooking up a few buildings to get started more modestly, but this would be what we were looking at to try to make the downtown area kind of gigabit, make Hagerstown a gigabit city in the core area. The first thing you have to do in terms of being successful at this is you have to identify your ownership and governance option, and we looked at several different options. We thought one of the best was a partnering with the county and potentially the library, the county library system and the school system to form a broadband authority. A second option is a public-private partnership where you would use a private sector partner to manage the network and potentially own some assets. And that could be something that's done independently by the city if you don't want to wait for the county and other partners to make up their mind about the broadband authority. If the city did decide to move ahead of the other partners, I don't see any difficult issues in terms of the city joining the broadband authority at a later date. We also looked at the other three other options, just leasing dark fiber. This has limited economic development value. It's not very expensive, but it's not particularly an efficient way of using the fiber.
Define dark fiber.
Dark fiber does not have any electronics on it, so there's no light actually. It's literally dark. There's no electronics at each end, and so there's no light going down the fiber. It's relatively it's somewhat less expensive to just put dark fiber on poles or underground and then lease that out. But it requires a lot more work in terms of someone else now having to actually create the network by adding network equipment. But this is an option that some communities do. One of the great assets that exists in the city and the county today is the WCPN. The city and county IT departments, along with the library and the school system, already have made some investments in fiber and have already saved the city and the county substantial sums of money by building and maintaining the WCPN network as opposed to continuing to lease lines. So there's already some assets that could be shared to begin making those available for commercial use. And then you could just continue doing what you're doing now, which is to kind of an ad hoc approach to managing WCPN. That wouldn't have really any economic incentives to do that. So the long-term goals, just to kind of wrap up, is we do think that if the city does decide to make some investments and/or the county, we don't recommend that local government gets involved in selling retail telecommunication services like internet, TV, or voice. We think the better business model is to manage it like a road. You build fiber roads and you lease capacity to service providers like Antietam Cable or the telephone company, and they use that fiber to sell directly to their own customers and would pay the city or the county or the authority a monthly fee. This has been done in a number of other communities and works very well, and it keeps the local government out of the telecommunications business directly. The key idea is that you really want to accelerate economic development and particularly make the downtown core part of the city more attractive to business relocation. Some of the short-term goals, we think there's a good, the Broadband Committee we worked with for the last 7 or 8 months, excellent group of people, and it represents all of the WCPN partners. We think this is the right group to continue to provide guidance to any ongoing initiatives. As I would very strongly recommend, you really have to make a decision about how you're going to manage and own the assets before making any investments. You are going to have to do some public awareness. People naturally have a concern if they hear local government is going to spend money on some kind of new initiative, so it's important to be able to explain to people why the government's getting into it, and that you'll have to repeat, I can assure you many times, you're not going to be buying TV or telephone from City Hall. They hear government and fiber and assume that they're going to be calling the city manager or the city council if their TV's out, and that's not going to be the case. We do think there's some things that can be done immediately. We always encourage an open ditch policy. In the city, you've already got a public works department that manages utilities. If they're digging or putting city fiber up on poles, if you have what we call a fiber overlay plan where you'd like to have fiber to make it commercial buildings and office buildings more attractive, and there's other public works projects that are following the same routes, consider being able to incrementally add fiber as part of those projects. And then finally, there's always opportunities to coordinate public safety, telecommunications spending with more general broadband infrastructure improvements. We often see public safety departments in other areas spending money on fiber. We've seen traffic safety fiber built, but there's no coordination with economic development strategies. So certainly look at other initiatives and make sure those are being coordinated. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
If one, excuse me, I'm sorry. If 1 gigabyte is good, why isn't 2 gigabytes twice as good?
It would be more, just because there's a cost factor. The standard connection today from a off-the-shelf commercial equipment is a gigabit connection, and that's more than adequate to meet most business needs. The next jump up is actually in equipment world is 10 gig, and it's easy. If you have the fiber there, if somebody needs more than a gig, you can provision a 10 gig circuit, but 10 gig equipment is very, very expensive relative to 1 gig. So 1 gig's quite affordable.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Brubaker?
Could you go over again why government should be doing this as opposed to the private sector totally? And, not your personal opinion, but your technical professional. And what kind of costs are you suggesting?
Well, from right now we have, when you look at the history of telecommunications in America, we started with a separate system for the telephone system called twisted copper pair, and then later on we came along, we had cable TV, and that was coaxial copper. The limitations of the technology roughly 50 to 100 years ago required 2 separate networks. With the introduction of the internet, we don't need 2 or 3, 4 networks in a community to deliver services. You can deliver TV, telephone, video, all of those over a single network. And the main reason is really financial. It's just more efficient to have a single network rather than 2 or 3 fully duplicated networks. So it lowers costs for everybody that uses telecommunications services to have a single shared network rather than 2 or 3 private networks. And so how do you do that? There's another reason, actually, and it's an issue of right-of-way. We're seeing in a lot of areas, it's one of those things they're not making more right-of-way, is you have 4 or 5 or 6 cable providers all using right-of-way to put in cable. At some point, it becomes very, very costly to add more cable. So one of the reasons for government to get involved is just good management, prudent management of right-of-way. Put in a single high-performance fiber cable that's shared among all of the providers. You not only lower costs, but you're being good stewards of public right-of-way. Costs involved, typically in an urban area, we'd be looking at perhaps $60,000 to $80,000 per mile for connectivity. If you can get it on poles in the downtown area, you might actually go lower than that. Another rule of thumb would be you're looking at typically $2,500 to $3,500 per premises. But the next step would be a more detailed, if you're interested in doing something, the next step would be a more detailed study of a specific pilot project in downtown and identify, what buildings you really want hooked up and put together costs for that. But we do have a fairly detailed cost estimate as part of our report.
Right. Is it the intent of this type of endeavor of the public's money to make money similar to how you would operate other infrastructure utility systems, like water and sewer and electric and other things? I mean, is it the intent of this to be functional like an enterprise system, or is it the intent of it more to be a public amenity, if you will?
I would, it should be operated on a cost-plus basis. It would be, this needs to be, if you decided to do this, you absolutely want to operate it as an enterprise fund, if that's the way you manage this. It needs to have its own set of books. It needs to stand on its own, and you need to have a clear financial plan that shows getting this into the black as quickly as possible. Making money is not the phrase I would use, but at some point, you definitely want to make sure whatever you're charging in terms of fees covers all of your operational expenses and any debt. Categorically, you want to do that. Above that, if you're doing it as an economic development initiative, at some point, anything above debt payments plus operational expenses is simply a tax on the business
Plus
community.
long-term maintenance.
Right. Having said that, there's nothing wrong with making a contribution to the general fund once it's in the black, and many communities do that. Once they pay off any debt and are in the black operationally, it's very common for other cities to make an annual contribution to the general fund.
The report clearly identifies of the options available, I think, which the report would recommend of those options to proceed with, and the direction that it be some type of local regional authority, some government, entity or conglomeration of local governments. And given that, and maybe I just don't understand it enough, but given that it's sort of an offshoot, if you will, of a larger state-regulated, funded, directed project, and it is in a defined area, for the part that we would invest locally, for that return, I would be curious as to whether or not that over time, it wouldn't mandate it in a manner that we don't originally foresee it. In other words, I hear the terms affordable, and effective, provision of service within a defined area. And frankly speaking, I wouldn't want to invest in a system whereby we would envision it being for some private purpose and it become some type of subsidized service for a specific location under specific parameters, where we would be limited in our scope and ability to dole it out, so to speak, for actual private investment.
I'm not sure what the question is.
You're
Well, let's take
referring to- you're
CDBG. Let's take CDBG funding, for example. CDBG funding says here, the government says here, you're an entitlement community, you get certain types of money, they're spent on specific types of provisions for services within your community. Here is a quasi sort of state, provided project. We attach on for this private prospective purpose. I wouldn't want it to be structured over time in a manner that then it would be geared toward non-private investment capital generating business product.
I think your premise is that if this involves One Maryland Broadband, the fiber that's laid through the One Maryland Broadband project, we don't even necessarily have to include that fiber in any of the plans.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
make clear,
Oh, I'm
is that
sorry.
there's
Okay.
a clear
That's what I was
separation
getting
of
at the
powers.
beginning.
If we don't, and that's one of the things where Andrew's talking about the multitude of fiber that we've identified that is coming through the city, but there are no exit ramps. So to say, we've got, I don't know, I can't remember what the count of fiber is going through the city center as it is right now, that's owned by various other entities, that is great to have running through here, but there is nowhere where we can say, we want to stop it right here and hook this building up. There's no,
Right.
so,
Right, I don't want the state to develop a highway,
No.
us to attach a road to it, and the state determine what we can charge for people to connect onto that road.
No, and that,
Or how a road's gonna be used.
That's extremely unlikely. Actually, the scenario would be more, suppose the city builds some fiber downtown, there would be what we call a meet point where there's some equipment in the same room from One Maryland Broadband and some equipment that belongs to the city fiber. You run a cable between the two, but there's several service providers on One Maryland that would then become customers of the city fiber, and they would pay the city for access to a building downtown. So it's actually beneficial for both networks to work cooperatively. But I've never seen a situation where a statewide network has been able to hijack a local network. I mean, it's as long as, and this is why you want to make sure you know who owns what, but that's not something I'd worry about. I mean, there's a way to simply electronically make it very clear where one network stops and the other starts. That's not a big issue.
Now, I have one last question, and that is, while you identify clearly what the preferred options are, it goes further and talks about those short-term goals, those things that you'd like to sort of immediately, but it doesn't in the analysis provide what that immediacy is. In other words, I'm not familiar enough to say we are at this point in the process right now with the One Maryland. We're going to be at this process 3 months from now. 6 months from now, you need to be making decision X. And so for me, I think it would be beneficial to have a better understanding in those short-term things. There's 7 or 8 of them listed, to say, here's where, city, you need to be 6 months from now if you are going to go in direction X.
now that both of the governing bodies of the county have, Hagerstown and Washington County have heard this presentation, one of the paths I want to take is to get back with the county or the WCPN and begin to talk about at least the first 2 or 3 of those short-term goals, to see, 1, a governance model, 2, see truly what the appetite is, especially as far as the county's concerned, as far as economic development and what they want to see happen. I know that in my discussions with some of you that there are, and with staff as well, with some of the inquiries we've had from staff, that there could potentially be a very short-term need in the city center, possibly for what would amount to a gigabit or more of bandwidth availability that currently is not there. So where I would like to take this is to begin as soon as possible, really, to start having these discussions with the county and with the other WCPM partners to see where we take this, irregardless of what happens with this One Maryland project. It just so happens this One Maryland project has given us the conduit of which to know what we have and what our opportunities are. And based upon the work that I've done and the places I've visited, Danville, Virginia, I think I've mentioned before, is the one place I went to. It's very much like Hagerstown. I have a concept of what I want of what my vision of this would be. I just want to make sure that I'm able to put it into an understandable format, but also be able to work with especially the county as far as economic development goes, to come with a coherent plan that I can then come back to you all and say, hey, here's the opportunity we have.
I think that sounds like an excellent strategy moving forward. And I just want to note some things from the executive summary, because I do think this is crucial to economic development in Hagerstown especially. But the fact that the folks who are using this kind of technology, who are looking for it, you said it was the number 2 reason for business relocation, but we talk about the creative class and the types of people who are creating the jobs of the future, and that is really who we're targeting. And Mr. Brubaker asked, why should the government do this and not the private sector? And I thought there was a very good breakdown of the inverse of the question: what happens if we don't make this strategic broadband investment? And I found it interesting that one of the points was that the private sector providers will continue to balkanize the region with higher prices and more limited bandwidth option because of limited competition. So in fact, this would not be competition limiting, from what I'm understanding. It would actually open up a lot of opportunity to compete. So I think that's an important point in terms of economic development and what we're trying to accomplish with job creation and bringing in the jobs of the future.
And the other thing is, this isn't a like a vapor type of a project. Like, we brought forward broadband over power lines many years ago. That was kind of an untested technology that some were using. It was still kind of amorphous out there.
Nascent.
This is not. This is used now prevalently throughout the country. It's just due to cost limitations, it hasn't gotten that last mile in very many places. Andrew said 135 communities are doing this municipal type broadband projects.
What kind of a cost are we looking at in terms of a city investment?
It's the one advantage we have is that, and I'm not speaking for Mike, if Mike's back there, I think. But we've been down these roads before. We have an electric utility, which means we have electric poles, and we have attachment rights, and we have right-of-ways. That in itself, we have conduits. That in itself was probably 65% of the costs if we had to do all that over again. So short of giving you a specific number, a lot of those costs are already taken care of.
So you would say we're well positioned to take the next steps with this?
Electric cities have typically been leaders in this area and are generally successful for the exact reasons Scott enumerated. You can hang your own fiber, and that's the single biggest cost associated with doing this. You can start in terms of what do you do in the next 6 months. I mean, it's up to you as governing body to make a decision to move forward or not. But I would say, don't wait and do something. You're in the position today because there's so much fiber. Is you could run fiber in just 3 or 4 blocks of downtown for a very small amount of money, much less than we actually did for the little study area. What I can tell you is the cities that get started keep going, and they're able to attract a lot more funding because they have an operating network. I've never seen it fail that once you have a network up and running, you have some private sector service providers on it, and you have some connected customers, that new sources of money come up. It becomes much easier to get things like CDBG block grants, federal funds, state funds. We've seen businesses offer to write checks to extend the network to their business. But you have to have an operating network, and you have to have some providers and customers on it. But the operating network could be 2 or 3 square blocks of downtown.
Mr. Brubaker?
Yes. To follow up on my earlier question, how have other cities, it seems to me this is something that's ripe for capitalization. Have they used bonds? Have they used long-term financing? It seems to me that if you could fund this with revenue-backed bonds or something like that, you could go at it in a much larger way once you had your scheme and it was persuasive to the rating agencies. So how have other cities done that, and is that one of the possibilities?
Revenue bonding is very viable. What I can tell you is it's hard to start with revenue bonds because you don't have a track record as a local government of building and running networks. So we typically see bonding as a second step in financing. Some of the projects we've worked with have typically been basically a funding, creating an enterprise fund for the project and loaning that project some money to get started. And then with the understanding that that's going to be paid back from revenue. Some communities have done bonding right out of the gate, but you're looking probably realistically at 12 to 18 months to suppose you said we want a bond for $20 million, we're going to do a significant part of the city. It's probably going to take you 12 to 18 months to do it, whereas I think the city probably has the capacity to have fiber up and available in 3 or 4 months if you start it small. We've worked with communities and helped them write successful CDBG block grants. There's federal money's not as accessible as it was, but ARC funded this study, and in fact, when I was talking to the ARC rep, Mark DeFalco, he actually said there could be some additional funding to move this project along. So what I like to talk about, to answer your question more broadly, is you need to think about a basket of funds, but if it's going to be primarily started as a municipal city project, the most common thing is, as I said, is to create an enterprise fund and to loan it some money with the understanding it's going to be paid back.
Right, but you said that is more of seed money.
Yes.
But if you're going to get into large scale, you threw out the money, 20 million, we could loan smaller sums to get the enterprise fund started and have that as a chit down the years to get paid back. But to do large scale stuff, and that's what I was talking about, moving on, because you emphasized the big scale, getting it, so you could really promote this and have it really available, that's going to take dollars.
That's correct.
But you say, get it working, get the organization going, and use small seed money to prove to the rating agencies, bondholders, that you can do this.
Correct.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
But one caution, grants and things like that often take a while. If ARC has it to hand out, we can get it. Good, let's get going. Mm-hmm. Same with CDBG, although we have so many other uses for CDBG. But in any event, some of those grants can take a long time, just like bonds can.
I always caution communities not to rely too heavily on grants. Right. I mean, it's great when you can get them. Grants have often been very helpful in getting something started, like this study. But you do need other sources of support.
With our advantages, a dense population, and we own the poles, we could build this thing as fast or as slow as we wish to, right?
You know, if nothing else, I would say put a line item in next year's budget for fiber and direct the Public Works Department to start hanging some, even while you may be debating the organizational and governance things.
I agree.
Dark fiber is basically the gold of the information economy. There's a joke about fiber is you buy as much as you can and never sell any.
Well, I do think this is something we
let
should
me-
move full steam ahead on.
If you don't mind.
Sure.
First, I'd like to commend you for your vision in this. You and I have been talking about this for 6 months or more now, and I know you've had a vision that's created this for Hagerstown. But not only that, this is a fine example of the county commissioners and the city working together. And I think the public needs to understand that. But it puts us in a particularly good place because the county commissioners don't own the polls. We own the polls, and we have a dense population that will benefit from this. Now let me just follow a couple of things. My understanding, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, because I don't pretend to know much about this, only what I learned from Scott, is that the fastest fiber around at this point is probably FiOS for business.
Yes. Well,
Which there's very little, if any, of. in-
FiOS, actually, FiOS is fiber and it's reasonably fast, but it's really, you know, they're not building any more FiOS.
That's okay. That was going to be my point. They're not building any more FiOS. And indeed, there's a business located in Hagerstown that uses FiOS. They pulled the cable or pulled the wires, whatever you call the technique, about a half a mile, I think. And that cost that particular business $500,000 to access the FiOS. And I believe you said a few minutes ago it costs like $60,000 if we own the poles. So I think that's a very significant difference. And I have talked to a couple of companies, two in downtown Hagerstown that really want this gigabyte stuff fast. And the other company that I just mentioned is going to move out of Hagerstown unless it can get more fiber. It can't survive on the FiOS. It needs much more fiber. So, I mean, this sounds like a win-win opportunity for the citizens of Hagerstown, big time. And indeed, when we show the county how to do it, they'll be able to do it too.
And if one of the things I talked more about in the report, but I sort of skipped over, but is worth mentioning to your point, one of the things that's really intriguing about Hagerstown and the opportunity you have is there's 4 or 5 long-haul fiber routes passing in or near the city. You know, that is a tremendous opportunity because it means you have a number of providers that can provide a wide range of services if you have these local off-ramps. In a lot of other communities where we work, one of the struggles is how do we connect to the rest of the world?
Getting it to there.
And Hagerstown somebody has already spent the money to go through Hagerstown. There's just no local roads. It's not just exit ramps. What I told the county the other day is imagine if somebody built a super highway through Hagerstown. There's no exit ramps, but there's actually no local roads. And that's really the situation you have. You want to build some local roads to get businesses on and off this 4 or 5 super highways, including one Maryland.
Well, this is undoubtedly a wonderful opportunity for us, and I fully concur with the mayor. We need to move forward on this faster than a speeding bullet. And
Faster than broadband.
I really appreciate your being here today and filling us in on the potential.
Scott, I'm going to be a pain one more time, if I may.
Go ahead.
I agree that we should, with the points you two have made, that we should try to find a way to move forward and take advantage of this. But I have some questions about the authority structure, which is the favorite one. Would that authority control And who would serve, I mean, have you thought these questions out, or is it just a general concept of an authority?
We've had discussions and meetings with Andrew during this whole study process of how we might do that. We haven't come to any type of consensus, and I think those are the discussions that we as a group, the same group of participants needs to get together and discuss how we would do that.
I guess the way I would like to see, I was working on this with you and the state
Yep.
and long before, and there was a scheme to run the state line the whole way around the city without coming in at all.
That's correct.
And we changed that.
That's correct.
We changed that. And lines then were planned, we got the state aware of what was happening. So I don't want, I want to be assured that the city gets a representative part of whatever is set up. And may I suggest that an approved basic network, tell me if this is not technically right, should be, if we incorporate an authority, there ought to be, like Metro. The Metro system was set up, there was an approved system down to where the stations would be. Mm-hmm. That was a compact between the states and the DC, and that line was going to be built. So I guess what I would like to be sure that there's an approved compact and some staging and some things if an authority is set up. The authority shouldn't, I think the political community needs to agree on that at the time that's done. So I would just throw out that caveat based on experience.
And I would, just to follow up on your comment, I would agree completely with what you're saying. We've helped a number of authorities be formed with multi-jurisdictional. I mean, and the way this would be done or should be done is the city doesn't join the authority until you're satisfied that the bylaws and the charter meet your requirements. You would join the authority by resolution of city council, and I would tell you, don't vote yes until you're satisfied you have the protections and you're getting whatever else you need.
Well, I'm going beyond bylaws. I'm talking about a fundamental basic mapped system that's part of the agreement.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure.
Sounds like there's broad consensus. I haven't heard from this side of the table, but I'm assuming there's broad consensus to move forward with working with the stakeholder partners that we have and continuing to make
one
this.
Final.
Sure.
I want to get a little more down to the nitty gritty. The fact is that a company, and I'll name a company because we're all familiar with it, like Antietam Cable could manage a system like this if they wished. If they wish. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of competing companies out there, I guess, that could manage it too. Mm-hmm. But if Antietam Cable wanted to manage it, they have the will to manage it, they could, and it would be a private-public partnership that could work for everybody, right, including them.
Absolutely.
And you would.
They're on the committee.
Yes.
And you would invite Antietam Cable to use the network to reach customers. I mean, they've said, quite frankly, there's customers they can't afford to build fiber to, so there potentially could be, there's multiple facets to the public-private partnership.
Right.
Finally, I would just note, I would encourage the city, if you think this is important, it could take 6 months to a year to get all parties to agree on an authority. You could start now with something that meets city needs and join the authority later. I don't see that the city needs to wait for the authority to be formed to act.
Thank you.
Especially downtown.
Especially
Absolutely.
downtown.
Yeah.
It's an
Absolutely.
easy, the low-hanging fruit, right?
That's
Absolutely.
right.
I mean, the other thing that would happen downtown is, particularly if you ran fiber just even a block or two over, some of the older residential properties would become potentially more valuable.
Right.
Thank you very much. This is a very
Thank you.
enlightening.
Thank you for the
you.
time. Sorry for the
Thank you.
Great
overage.
presentation.
Okay, next up on the agenda is Synagro contract discussion. Good people from the Utilities Department here with us.
Good
Thank
evening.
you.
And with us this evening, I'll start and recognize Tom Maestri is with us. He's the Director of Renewable Energy Services for Synagro out of their White Marsh office. And also Rick Schumann is with us, who's the plant superintendent locally for us here at the Synagro process at our wastewater treatment plant. And of course, you know, Joe's sitting here beside me. The first thing, I fat fingered a key in the memo. I put 1998 in the second paragraph. It's actually 1988, and I'll explain there a little bit more. That was my mistake, and then proofread it and still missed it. Just a little bit of background on what Synagro does for us. We pump sludge out of our primary clarifiers. About 60% of the sludge initially goes up.
A little louder, please, Mike.
About 60% of the sludge goes up.
We have really bad communications equipment around here.
Get him some broadband.
Yeah, do some broadband.
Yeah, we could utilize that every now and then. And we pump it up to a belt press and thicken it up to a cake, get it over to Synagro, and they basically then remove the water out of it, make a biosolid pellet that then is disposed of at their whim. 1998 was when the initial contract between the city, it was Envirogro at the time, which is of course morphed into Synagro. Through the years, that contract had provisions where the facility was constructed by, designed and constructed by Synagro, paid for by the city, $1.8 million, and then fully operated by Synagro. The contract had provisions. They had two specific patent processes that were utilized, which are wholly owned and operated by Synagro during the contract term. And there was also a license agreement within that. In, I guess it was 2001, was the end of the first 10-year contract. The city entered into just an agreement, extended the initial terms for 5 years. In 2006, then it was Donnie was a wastewater operations manager then. He and I brought a 5-year contract into the council that was approved, and we did change some of the structure of the contract to a flat fee with provisions up to 14 million gallons a year would be treated by Synagro, you know, using our averages and the numbers that we worked through at the time. And if there was an overage, there was a calculation called an excess volume fee that played into the pricing for us per month. We also did a little change in who purchases the polymer. Those were the main two provisions of the 5-year contract, and it also contained provisions for 1-year extensions out of that. And we're into the second-year extension, so it's been 7 years since we've been up in front of the council. Operationally, it's about $94,000 a month for our payment to Synagro. They're treating, like I had in the front there for some of the numbers for what they treat for a dry product for us. It's about 15 dry tons a week is what they're putting out of the facility. I did run some numbers for expenditures. The 94,000. You know, we've always been conservative in our approach for contracts. We continued with it this time to run in for if a city actually operated it. If we use some of our figures for wages and benefits, tipping fees, trucking charges, administrative allocation, chemical maintenance, it comes to about $100,388 per month if we were to operate, and then there's still other fees that they're taking care of. So for a bang for our buck, utilizing their own process, it does pay us to utilize Synagro. What we have, we're here in July of last year. Tom and I made a presentation in regard to utilizing another type of process, which was a design build, whereas Synagro basically would own the process, own the buildings, completely rebuild the facility. Through the last year, we've met many times on it, and once again, taking our conservative approach, this just didn't work for us. So what's in the contract now, we just would request continue. It's the same fee. It's a 15% plus for any type of construction charge and maintenance fees. We have built into the contract, which was actually in our contract 7 years ago, it's basically a 10-year CIP, which amounts to current pricing or estimated at $1.6 million for upgrades to the facility. I won't lie to you, we've been woefully lacking in upgrades to the facility that we probably should have done the last few years. You know, we were concentrating instead on ENR upgrades and headworks and disinfection, and now we have all that behind us operating the way it should. We need to look at the process we're working right now in the pelletizing process. So once again, the way the contract would be structured, it'd be 10 years from whenever the contract is consummated. For our CIP out for the 10 years, Synagro would take care of the engineering, design, the RFP, construction management with a 15% adder on it. Operationally in our budget, last for fiscal year 14, we did increase our operation costs for Synagro by 22% up to $1.5 million a year. And we do have a CIP separate from that for smaller items for $150,000 per year. I know I gave you a lot of information to run through there in one quick spot, but
Mike, just to be clear, before EnviroGrow and the pelletizer,
Yes.
what did we do with our sludge?
it was land applied, to my understanding at that point in time. The regulations were much different. Many groups, wastewater facilities, still land apply. Joe and I go to quarterly meetings. We belong to MAMWA, which is a municipal group for wastewater facilities. Howard County, Westminster, they all still own properties where they haul their sludge off to, some pelletize, some just take it out as cake. The Maryland Department of the Environment and MDA have regulated that to the nth degree. It has changed much in the last few years. Those that do land apply, they have to store, I think it's 5 months out of the year. So you can't land apply a certain part of the year through the winter months. You have to be able to store this volumes of sludge and pellets, and we all know what issues that causes. I mean, they're fighting big time what to do with
Cake
that.
is a euphemistic way of
That would
describing
be
it.
correct. It is
Yeah.
it is a term that we would use in the industry.
Yes, Mr. Munson.
One question.
Yes, sir.
Once this is pelletized, who has the responsibility to create the market?
Synagro.
I'm sorry?
Synagro does. They have
They create the market?
They create the
Okay.
market, or if there is
From
no
the-
market.
From the beginning to the end, okay.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Yeah, we got to keep them going.
How much of that are you able to, pellets, are you able to sell locally, and how much goes out of the market area? Do you know? Roughly.
Can I answer what goes on now?
Most of the pellets right now go to Union Bridge as an energy,
Oh,
making cement.
It's a fuel
Okay.
source. They're using it as a fuel source.
okay.
They like our product because of the BTU value and the end result of the cement is good. Last year, up to this point of, I think July 1st, the bulk of it went to Frederick County, Virginia. So it went to Western Maryland, near Axton, Maryland, Marvin, Colba, Fair. Some of it used to go to John Hurst, he's Slacko, he's got his own liquid operation there now. The Bowers from straight down 65 take a good bit. But most of it, the market was Frederick County, Virginia.
There's no potential for waste to energy in our own, within our own utility system, I would imagine.
Not at the present time, no. Of course, the waste energy part is being offset instead of having to pay to get rid of it. At least they
Sure.
now have a use for it.
Mike,
Go ahead, Mr. Brubaker.
Yeah.
Mike, you said the 93.4 average operational fee, 1,000 per year, or per month,
That's per
excuse,
month.
per month,
Yes, sir.
excuse me. Compared to 100,000 of city costs?
I ran some quick numbers using city cost, and once I got over $100,000, I quit putting in other
Okay, so
things that
it's-
I could think
You
of.
say it's not the full analysis?
Correct, that's not the full analysis.
On
It was the major
But
numbers.
that leads to my question. There's also this 15% fee and other costs. What has the actual experience been, the actual for the past few years of what we've paid them?
And that's the average. It's $94,000 a month.
That
for the past 12 months.
includes all the
includes-
other-
Yes, sir. And the 15% is if they were to go out and they did an HVAC upgrade, they're allowed to add 15% on for the design and operation of that. That's where the 15% comes in. And if we were to do, a large-scale project to upgrade the dryer, we're going to pay them an extra 15% for them to do the engineering, construction management, and RFP work on it. That's where the 15%
Okay,
comes
so
in.
then, it's just that, maybe it's just me, the memo I was reading there, the other costs were above that
Yeah, no,
93.4.
sir.
They're worked into that number.
Yes, sir, that's
Okay,
correct. We've had a good relationship with Synagro. You know, the staffs, Tom's been here ever since I've been with the city. Tom's been working with us, and Rick's been the plant superintendent for many years down there, and operationally, it does work well for us.
I guess this is my day for the questions, but you said what we did before was land application. I'm familiar with that Montgomery County did that. Believe it or not, they had land down between Montgomery and Prince George's that they laid it on. But it caused lots of controversy, as you might imagine, in the local area. But regardless of what we did before, what do, besides this process, what do other, just since you're proposing a long-term contract, what do other communities do on this issue? Are there other things besides land application or this pelletization that are done elsewhere?
The rest would go to landfill. So landfill application, land application, and pelletize for fuel. Those are basically your three sources.
Those are it?
Some people incinerate it in New England. That's one of the ways we do it in New England.
Well, we're incinerating it, in effect. We're incinerating it.
No, I'm talking about incinerating the cake.
Oh, okay, before it's pelletized.
Yes.
And Mike, just to cover all the bases with the council, to bid this work or this service, is that an option? Rather than just a 10-year extension?
Yes, sir. It could be an option. The groups that can bid on it that are viable are very small. Synagro is the leader in this process. There is one in upstate New York. There's a company in Oregon, a couple other smaller companies that can do this. But once again, Synagro is the leader in the industry for this type of process for us. We did bid most recently with the council, approved for our solids removal from the water treatment plant, from the lagoons. We bid that, and there were 3 to bid on it, and Synagro won the bid on that also. So we utilize them in other groups, in other areas of the city also for their services.
What does the county plant do? I know they had a super processing thing that was controversial, but I don't know if it cleared this.
Joe and I were talking about that. We think that it's still applied to the landfill. We think it goes to the landfill.
It's not it's buried or applied?
It would be buried, landfill. Yeah, and we'll check and make sure on that. We haven't had discussion with them recently, but I'll make sure on that so we didn't misspeak. And once again, their facility is approximately operating at 2 million gallons per day.
Right.
Versus our.
We're about 8.
Yes, so we're running about 6 right now with the flows that we're seeing, but still, yeah, we're
we've
3
been
or
up
4
to
times
8,
as
yeah.
big. Correct, absolutely.
Any other questions or comments from council?
Legal counsel reviewed the documents, and they were fine with the language. It's been approved, of course, by the Synagro group, and if so, then I'll have it on for the preliminary agenda review for new business.
When does this expire? I mean, what is the?
We're in a year-to-year contract term with them now, as long as it's mutually agreed upon.
Calendar year?
We can continue. Yeah, it's from July.
Oh, fiscal year.
Fiscal year. Yeah, so we're actually into the second year of the 1-year renewal.
Does anyone have any objection to moving forward with this? Okay.
I don't.
I just want to make sure the staff has clear direction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for this.
Thank you very much.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the update of the city noise ordinance, chapter 155. Hello.
We're here today, we have Police Chief Mark Holzman with us as well. We're here today suggesting that the city adopt a complete overhaul of our noise ordinance, which is chapter 155 of the city code. It was first adopted in '67 and last comprehensively updated in '96. Beginning last fall, a group of staff from police, engineering, planning, code administration started meeting to review the existing ordinance because we thought there were some deficiencies in the ordinance as a tool for helping us to protect quality of life in the community. Why we felt it needed to be updated, it's not clear who enforces the ordinance. It's confusing as to whether the ordinance regulates noises made by businesses by the very nature of the list of specific prohibitions in the ordinance. Even though it says it's not an exclusive list, the nature of the list suggests it's more concerned with noises made by individuals, because it talks about horns, car horns, radios, stereos, shouting, barking dogs, that kind of thing. Some of the exemptions are a little confusing, like for the exemption for permitted construction activities, which suggest it's exempt and you could make noise all night long if you wanted to. The normal daytime usage term is not defined for lawn care exemptions. The list of exemptions suggests that certain activities might be prohibited or subject to the ordinance unless approved in advance by the mayor and council, such as amplified sound at athletic events, and they all have amplified sound, operations by county or state government, that type of thing. The plainly audible standard, which is how we tested at 50 feet, has been deemed too short of a distance for testing by the courts in some other jurisdictions, so that was something we discussed at length. The only relief from the provisions for, special situations is by getting a variance from the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene or by approval in advance from the mayor and city council. And another issue that we viewed as a problem is the violation of this ordinance is a criminal offense, so violators would be arrested, which seems a bit excessive, and it's not usually the case in most other ordinances. We explored ideas for improvement from ordinances from 18 other jurisdictions. Changes that we're proposing is there would be a public purpose statement included at the beginning of the ordinance. So it explains why it is it's something the city is concerned about. It includes a list of definitions so that when you're enforcing this ordinance, there's no confusion about what things mean. Examples of some things that are defined are excessive noise, plainly audible, daytime, that kind of thing. There's a much more simplified prohibition section, but a more detailed exemptions section. The exemptions including what would be acceptable household, government entity, public facility, emergency and construction noises, and under what circumstances. It includes a new special permits provision through the city clerk's office to provide relief on a case-by-case basis for certain noise-generating activities otherwise prohibited. And when these would come through, the city clerk would confer with city staff and the attorney as needed, depending on what the request is. Clearly stated determination of violation section, how you determine the violation and who enforces the violation when we get complaints. We've kept it simple, so there's no special knowledge of district boundaries needed or special skills or special equipment. It's a plainly audible test. We're retaining the plainly audible test for the reasons I just cited, but we would expand it from 50 feet to a 100-foot test. And we kicked that around for a while. If 50 foot was too short, what would be reasonable? We thought 100 foot would be reasonable for the testing distance. And then violations of the ordinance would become a civil offense, where a violator would get a fine. They would not be dragged off. And we're recommending that we repeal the existing Chapter 155 and adopt a new chapter. And so we're here to answer any questions, as well as Bill Nairn, who gave us legal advice on this. If you had any questions.
In the updated, or the draft ordinance, the new special permits, does that mean for fireworks, for instance, at baseball games, that they would no longer come through the city council for those approval, or the city clerk would now be responsible for granting those special permits?
There's still an exemption that specifically deals with those things. It just says by the city of Hagerstown.
Oh, okay.
This would be for other things that might come up. Right now, it says parades, firework displays, festivals, and other special events are exempt, subject to the terms of approval or permits by the city of Hagerstown.
Gotcha.
So that whatever process we have, that would continue.
Any other questions, comments?
Kathy, you list two very specific prohibitions under 55, 155-3A. What's that?
There's too much noise outside.
Oh, too much noise. You've got two specific prohibitions. How would you handle a situation like somebody's got an amplified rock band for a picnic in their backyard? How does that work? Just to walk council through some examples.
That would be, you would do the plainly audible test if the police received a complaint. They would do the plainly audible test at 100 feet, or that these folks may have come to the city in advance and sought a special permit for their event.
So they wouldn't be required to have a permit, but if we got a complaint,
And we would do this, the
police
preliminary
would do
audible
their,
test.
their judgment there. And then we've had situations at festivals with people with amplified presentations. I don't know, Chief, if you want to, you and I talked about that this spring, just to cover that issue, because there are freedom of speech issues as well that come into play here.
Sure. As far as the an event at a park, we had one at City Park, which we were getting some complaints a few blocks over. They're mentioned in here as far as the getting a permit through the Parks Department for that. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm thinking about the Blues Fest, where you gave me a call one evening over a situation there.
Sure, yeah, we had an individual that was using a megaphone or it was an electronic device projecting his voice, and standing about a half a block away from the vent entrance and just speaking and trying to speak over top of the things that were going on inside the event. So that would be the 100-foot rule would apply there. If it was audible from more than 100 feet away, you would have to turn it down. So if somebody wanted to just sort of a walk and story tell kind of thing, and you had a small device, we talked about that, and that wouldn't be impacting anybody as you walked around and just amplified your voice a little bit. But if you had an amplification device where you were turning up a loudspeaker and speaking and projecting that beyond 100 feet, then that would be a violation of the ordinance.
Unless they got a special permit from the city clerk, because they're seeking that provision for the failure to grant a special permit would unreasonably burden the exercise of the applicant's constitutional right of free speech or other constitutional rights. There's 4 categories for getting a special permit, and under the city attorney's advice, we added one in there about freedom of speech. Because I think that was the issue with that
Right,
gentleman
so the
at
council
Blues Fest.
could still grant a special permission, but then we would work with the permit holder, permit application person to define that area so it wouldn't impact businesses or neighborhood. But perhaps they would have to project it further than 100 feet. They would need a permit for that. Is that what we're speaking of?
It's not council, it's the city clerk.
The city clerk.
Who makes the call on the exemption for item E? Is it a degree? Is it a type of construction activity? Is it a certain time of day? Are they strictly within that sole seasonal provision? There are clearly days in spring when work is being conducted that have been above, the 90-degree mark. I'm just curious.
Yeah, we put it down as an exempt. Construction activities for, building construction permitted kind of activities would be exempt during daytime hours, but during hot weather, they could start a little earlier, starting at 7 a.m. on Saturdays and starting at 6 a.m. on weekdays. And we conferred with some of the builders in the community, and those hours were reasonable to them, those starting hours.
The builders, but
Right.
not utilities. Those are the complaints I got this summer, was utilities operating and beginning operations at that early hour. And I don't know whether it was associated with heat or they just started 6 a.m. every day.
I don't think exempts utilities. Utility work in the road, unless it's permitted ahead of time. That's what you're referring to?
Mm-hmm.
Jackhammering the street
Like
up
regularly
at 6
scheduled
a.m.
utility work. It's not an emergency, provision. They've set to do work in this specific neighborhood on these specific dates for this
Right.
specific
We
period.
We didn't put any kind of time frame parameter on activities undertaken by the municipal, county, state, or federal government agencies
Well,
or their contractors to promote or protect
I'm
public
talking about
health.
like Columbia Gas,
Right.
those types of utility providers. I mean, I'm just
Yeah,
envisioning
if-
somebody goes out there and do they say, hey, it's supposed to get 90 degrees today at 11 o'clock. I think E is the one I'm most familiar with getting complaints about. So I'm just trying to figure out who's going to determine what the parameters are for when when item E here is permissible?
For the earlier start.
Right.
Would it reference summertime? I think
Yeah,
that's what they're
we
interested in.
just talked about summer.
Summertime hours, so we could use the calendar dates for summer. If it's beyond that, I would think they would have to get a special permit from the city clerk to do that type of work a bit earlier. So we're thinking about the roofers or somebody jackhammering up the street, in April at 6 o'clock is what you're talking about. That would not be summertime. They would need a special permit to do that work unless it was emergency work.
I mean, I would like to see something where it says to avoid working in extreme heat conditions when, similar to what we do with our electric utility for turning off and on, where it would say, to avoid working in extreme heat situations in which the expected temperature for the day is to rise above 90 degrees or something. I mean, I think 90 is probably, I don't know. Otherwise, I just think it's nebulous. I don't know how, hot out to you might be much different than hot out to me.
Bottom line is just summer exemption period.
Right, because it can be 82 in the summer and it's so humid that you
Right.
we want
But
to
the
start.
resident's going to come in and say, what do you mean they're doing it because of heat? It's supposed to be 80 degrees today. They really need to start on a Thursday morning when I'm not getting up till 7:30.
And perhaps
And those are the complaints I
Perhaps the
get.
solution to that is just take the heat issue right out of it and just put on there that during the summer, these are the hours, and during the winter, these are the hours. Because I would imagine some construction companies change their hours for the summer. I think maybe putting an awful big burden on everybody to make a determination today whether what the forecast was. But I agree with what you're saying, Kristen, as long as we put in there that we're making an exemption because of heat. If it's not hot, people are going to wonder why we're being exempt. So I think I would take out the heat portion and just put in during these months, these
It
are
just
the
seems like
hours.
we're trying to remove
You can almost
the
put them in
uncertainty here.
definitionally.
I'd like to move that one too.
Put in some actual months.
No, just get rid of, as Lou said, just get rid of the heat exemption and say these are going to be at 6 a.m. during the summer.
Okay.
Mr. Munson, go ahead.
Okay, that's where I read it. Well, I'd like to make this point because I was asked to make this point Wednesday, almost a week ago. I came out of my house fairly early in the morning, and my neighbor jumped all over my case for a while because at 3 o'clock in the morning, the trash collectors went through the neighborhood and made enough noise that it woke everybody up, including me. I didn't care, but he did. I notice here that the city does have the right to control its own operations. I just want to make that point, that it doesn't only happen with private people who are doing work, it happens with the city government itself. And hopefully it's not going to happen again. My neighbor and neighbors would like it not to happen again. But a couple of other things. First, you sent us a letter over the weekend saying that the noise ordinance may be one way that we can control the hub scrap BZA decision. Does this noise, is this intended to do that? Is that why we're considering this thing?
The frequent complaints that we have gotten there from nearby residents made us look this ordinance, wondering how is this ordinance helping or not helping.
Your frequent complaints from one person, correct?
We have
one person.
We have received frequent from one person, although we had
And this changes it to make it easier to close manufacturing operations down?
No, that
I mean, is
not
that what this is all about?
That is not the intent, no.
Does it change it to make manufacturing operations, to make it more difficult for them?
It makes it clearer what the city's intent is. The existing noise ordinance could be enforced that way right now. It's
Well,
so confusing what we mean by our existing ordinance.
It's clear what this is all about.
Well,
But there's another issue that I'd like to raise too. I really get tired of sitting on the dual highway at Cannon Avenue and having the guy in the car next to me playing rap music at the very top of the volume that he can get out of that radio, and there's never a cop in sight. Now, you guys are busy. I understand that. You got more important things to do than play around with people, than go after people on rap radio. And as a consequence, you probably never will. But a lot of people complain about that. I've had dozens of complaints about that since I've been a councilman. I don't.
No, you're absolutely right, Mr. Councilman. The state law prohibits that. It's in the transportation code, and it's exempted out of this city ordinance. So if there's a vehicle traveling on the road, they pull up at the square, wherever, and the music's thumping too loud, the officers can write a state citation for that. If that same vehicle is parked, and it's on the Burger King lot, and you can hear it clearly audible for more than 100 feet, then we would apply this city ordinance to it. And I do like the fact it's a civil infraction. It's much easier. It's more like a civil ticket. It's more like getting a traffic ticket. The officer could walk over and cite them for this civilly versus placing them in handcuffs, which just was not happening. And I don't think we would want our officer to walk over there and handcuff somebody to enforce a city noise ordinance. So by making this a civil ordinance, it actually, I think, puts a better tool in the hands of the police. Another thing to mention here is it still creates good neighbors. So if it's on the other side of that wall, if you have adjoining apartments, that's also mentioned in here. That provision we kept. So we go to the apartment and there's noise coming from upstairs, we can apply it that way as well.
Okay, but if you change it from 50 to 100 feet, won't that be a problem?
That's only for outdoors. That's only for outdoors. The indoor provision's still written in there for commonly adjoined walls.
Does it apply to radio noises outdoors?
Yes. Radio
so
noise.
It'll be 100 feet then?
For outdoors.
So in fact, there will be fewer citations or whatever because of the 100 feet.
Well, no, I'm thinking of it as two different things. Let's say it's an apartment building, we get lots of calls for apartment buildings for loud noise coming from one apartment to another.
Can imagine.
We can still enforce this. In fact, it would be enforced more because it is a civil infraction. We could just get their information, write them a civil ticket, just like you would get a traffic ticket, and that would be over with. It'd be settled right there instead of forcing an arrest situation. If it's an outdoor party and they're jamming the music outside, if that's audible beyond 100 feet, then we could enforce it again.
Okay. Let me just make one other point. With the kind of vile language that comes out of some of the rap music, you might be applauded if you put handcuffs on them.
So noted.
When it's not just rap music, Mr. Munson, it's really all kinds of music, but the problem are the stereos on wheels that you're talking about. And I hear them in my neighborhood and all over the place. I know that the police do whatever they can, but I do agree with the chief, this is probably a better tool to put in their hands. Although I'm kind of disappointed that we're not going to be outlawing hooting specifically in our ordinance anymore.
Well,
I was wondering what is the difference between a yell, a shout, and a hoot? I guess that's where you get into definitions, right? And that was a rhetorical
question. Somebody must have had a problem at some point with hooting.
Yeah, hooting must have been a real problem in 1996
we were drawing
or
straws
67.
for demonstrations, but nobody would go.
But on a more serious note, I did follow up with staff. I want to let people know because I heard the complaints loud and clear from last week's citizen comments about some of the things happening in the neighborhoods, and I really do see the foul language and profanity as being a problem. And although I can use those words with the best of them, and I'm not easily offended, it does not make for a pleasant experience at the park or on the street when people are screaming these things across the way, just to get the attention of their friends. But the chief did inform me that it is already a violation to use that kind of language in public. Again, I think this
citizens arrest.
This is
You're not going to get there with a police officer.
maybe a better tool for to put in the hands of police officers. But the sad bottom line is you can't regulate taste. And, a lot of these folks who engage in that kind of behavior are just untasteful people, and you'll never get them to really change. But, I've found the dirty looks sometimes giving people after they make a statement like that. Or if I'm in school, I'll just simply ask someone to rephrase what they were saying. But I don't think we really have that option at the public parks either. Mr. Brubaker.
I and others have complained to me about just a general increase in yelling and shouting at the top of people's lungs. I don't know what's going on, but I've noticed that others have said, I think it's just a trend or something, but so whether obscenities are involved or not, that would apply if it was disturbing it over 100 feet outside or not. An individual talking at the top of their lungs or hollering. I don't just mean like just one holler, hey, to a friend, but I mean just screaming and hollering and that sort of thing, going on and on, or talking incredibly loud. You can hear it the whole way a block down on a city street.
Right. In the past, what we would do, and all those things are completely annoying. You know, there are a lot of behavior type of ordinances already in Chapter 173, and we've actually been reviewing some of those and reviewing some of them with the city attorney to try to update a few of them. There are a few other interesting ones in there, but you're talking about the yelling. Absolutely, that can be enforced. It can be enforced by this. And in the past, what we do is we would enforce the disorderly conduct. So we'd tell them to stop. You're disturbing the peace, and if they didn't, then they would get arrested. So this puts a little bit lower threshold, a little bit easier to enforce for the officers working. You know, and we would encourage them to, you know, rather write the citation versus go all the way to an arrest situation. And a lot of times they wouldn't get to an arrest situation because it would just say, stop it or I have to arrest you. But that threat you would stop.
I mean, really, part of what I think we talked about, and I don't know that it's been mentioned, is in the enforcement of this, if somebody is violating the law, the police would first tell them to stop and wouldn't necessarily pull the book right out and write a citation, but if the people said, yes, officer, I'm sorry, and you know, stop or move on, if you will, the officer would have a discretion not to necessarily write a ticket every time that there's a literal violation of this. Because sometimes it's just a matter of telling people and the annoyance stops and that's the end of it. I mean, I think we talked about that, and that's kind of a general approach we would take, except in the very extreme case or where somebody refused to cooperate after being warned.
Right, and we could still arrest for disorderly conduct. It's not going to prevent us from it, but it would give us that tool. Yes, you're right. Once we warn them, come back and fine them. If you know you're going to get a fine versus getting locked up, you might challenge the cop. I'm not sure you're really going to lock me up for that. But if he says, "Hey, stop it," or you're going to get a ticket, and there's a fine with it, you know, to me, it's an easier threshold to hit. It's like getting a traffic ticket. Might be a bit more enforceable for us.
A follow-up question, and you said motor vehicles are not affected by this. It has moving motor vehicles. It needs to be the state. But I just will register that I think another thing that has changed, and it's changing as we speak, is the amount and willingness of people to drive with virtually open pipes on vehicles, motorcycles, and cars. It's gotten ludicrous, and I like cars. I like hopped-up cars far more than the average person, and I'm more familiar with them than most people. But I don't think that gives people the right to I mean, it's just all the time, incredibly loud. It didn't go on 50 or 60 years ago. People got tickets for that. And now it just seems like it's open season. And I'm a guy that sat next to Indy cars and tolerated it when everybody else had earplugs. So it's got to be bad if it bothers me. You know, I put up with them without the earplugs and enjoyed them. So if I can do that, and I'm still bugged by it's just constant, and I don't think it's an enforced item anymore very much. So I'll register that, but I think it takes away from quality of the neighborhood, and they're definitely I can hear them half a mile away from from my house on the dual highway.
Yeah.
And again, I like vehicles, but I don't know why the public should have to put up with full open pipes or very close to it.
I was wondering.
I'll make that statement as a car guy.
Okay.
You make a- you
I'm
make a
so
good
glad you're a
point.
car guy. Marty, you're right. And of course, I wondered whatever happened to that if you were in a car and it was making excessive noise. Because back when I was in high school, we actually got pulled off to the side of the road and said, park it, find another way home. And now it's like anything. And another example with cars and with music. I'm not hearing the music. I'm hearing, and I don't know the terminology of it, the boom, 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 boom. And that is 6 houses up the street. And it sits there, and it does it. And you think, okay, when is it going to stop? Because it actually rattles your windows. And then we have motorcycles that we deal with that rip into it. Well, the
Yeah,
motorcycles,
we're including the motorcycles.
and if the motorcycles really
including the motorcycles.
really don't care for the neighborhood, then they're really going to kick it in even more so. And you know, I'm tempted sometime to just go ahead and wing something out at them, and then they'd have to catch me to make sure that I was the one who did it. But you know, the noise is to excess. It really
I
is.
think motorcycles are the largest violator, biggest violator.
Yeah, but we've got cars that are on the street that's
I know.
got those openings in the back, and again, I don't know the terminology,
Right.
but
Well,
I don't
straight
know how
pipes
they
or the-
stand it,
yeah.
because I would be driven nuts with the sound. What it's going to do to them when they're in their 40s, I don't know. As far as the swearing goes, there was an incident over on Jefferson Street, and these are young kids, and the police officer was in fact there. When the police officer got done talking to this young gentleman, he turned around, and as he was going up the hill, he must have been swearing every word that there was to swear. And a gentleman that lived up on the corner said to me, Penny, you would not have believed. I actually said, young man, please don't use that kind of language. Well, that young man turned around and gave him every 4-letter word there was, and it just continues on. And how you can stop that, unless you're there, you can't.
It's called parents, Penny.
Yeah, well,
The problem is,
unfortunately,
too many of the children are unsupervised.
Unfortunately, this deals with that whole household that is there on the corner of Cleveland and Jefferson. But it's all over. I mean, these kids will just as soon look at you and say it, and what are you going to do? And we can't do anything. And the police can't catch them because they're not going to be there when it's going down.
Well, let's try to refocus, because we are slightly behind on our agenda here.
I know, but I didn't get to talk, and this was it.
Well,
And Hub
true.
Scrap, let me finish.
Go
Hub
for it.
Scrap, there was more than one person who ever said anything about the noise. I went there long before election, and the people that live in that area and the time frame that it got started on was really, really bad. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. There was more than one person who did do the complaint with that.
Well, let me make a point too. It's tough being a cop. We realize that, and all the ills of society are supposed to be solved by you. You and the teachers, I guess, because a lot of the parents have abandoned their jobs, and we do all understand that, Chief.
I appreciate that. All the things you're talking about are important. I mean, the behavior issues, juvenile issues, neighborhood issues. We've been talking about this at our staff meetings and roll calls, and just saying, you know, it's really those kinds of things that are the real issues that are bothering the public, even much more so than the stuff that catches the headlines. It's what affects your quality of life at the neighborhood level. So we're going to keep talking about it at our department. I will look into this. I'm not an expert in the traffic law, but I'm pretty certain there's something for modification of pipes and things like that. So I'll get one of our traffic experts to brief me on that, and I'll let you know. But we'll get back to enforcing that a bit more within the traffic code. You're talking about the bass coming off of the car, that sound,
I mean,
that
it
falls
just
under the one we
vibrates.
just talked about.
Yeah, but again,
under the state
you know,
code.
the police, and it's just knowing that it's there, but till we can get an officer that could be there, you know, by that time it's going to be gone, or one of the neighbors is going to really get ticked off.
And we have a great
we'll have a fight.
Department of Juvenile Justice here locally. They do everything they can do within the state regulations, is how I would put it. They really go out of their way to help us out, and you know, they're available to us. But there are some restrictions that they're dealing with when it comes to dealing with juveniles.
Yep.
It doesn't, it doesn't discourage us from writing the tickets and from doing the paper arrests, so to speak, where we fill out the charge and we send it to juvenile justice, calls the parent in and has a sit down, and they go through a process. You just have to keep doing it. You have to keep at it, and the same individuals, and eventually we'll move them on to an adjudication level and get them into court or something. Because you just can't tolerate it just because they're underage. It's not a free pass. Just because you're underage, it's not a free pass. So, but I appreciate that.
So, sounds like there's consensus, but please confirm to move forward with this.
Not yet. It's not consensus.
Don's still.
Kathy and I are going to have a conversation about this because I don't quite really understand.
I think it's very unfair, Don, to say that it was aimed at one party.
Well, she sent the letter to us. She sent the letter to us, and I think it deserves an in-depth conversation.
Well, regarding hub scrap, we've also talked about Section 200 within the city code, which is Section 200 in the city code deals with, it's titled sanitation, but it deals with factories and noise, dust, and pollution, fumes all coming off of a factory-type operation. So I think Section 200 more directly applies to a factory that's in operation than this ordinance would, from my point of view.
Okay, thank you.
I'm all for it. Okay. You have one.
Oh, you got me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll be glad to assist.
So we've got one amendment. We've got one amendment on E. Do you want us to come back with the draft in reference to the open pipes, or just move forward with it as it is?
I'm ready to approve. Just move forward.
Just move
We can
forward.
amend it if
Yeah.
we need to.
Okay. So we'll bring it back for introduction then in September.
The open pipes wouldn't fit
That
this
we
anyway.
can't
That would
do
be
that.
transportation.
I was just taking the opportunity.
That's state law. He's reminding me that we need to enforce the state law. He knows
Okay.
that. So we'll get on that.
Thank you.
And we know, Chief, we know you have the answer.
All right, the next item on the agenda is a sister city proposal with Hagerstown, Indiana. And we have Karen Giffen and Mike Keifer coming to the table. And Mr. Tom Ryford is here as well.
You have the noisy bunch after the noise ordinance. Mr. Mayor and City Council, Mike Keifer has had a proposal for a sister city in America. And what's in a name? He wants to reach out to Hagerstown, Indiana, and he definitely has a contagious excitement on this project. He believes in this project, and I'm going to have him speak about it. But first, we also have Linda Irvin Craig with us today, and Tom Ryford. I know that Mayor Geisberts and City Council Lou Metzner have been to some meetings, and I know that Mike has spoken with Councilmember Don Munson as well early on. And I think he wants to reach out for friendship and to assist to getting to know other areas of the United States. And with that, Mike, would you explain your proposal?
Thank you, Karen. Mayor, council members, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you this evening to speak on this project. This is an idea that I know I'm not the first person that has thought about it. I stumbled across Hagerstown, Indiana a couple years ago, just playing around on the computer. I wanted to find out if there was any other Hagerstowns in the United States. I come to find out that there are only two, us and Hagerstown, Indiana. When I found that out, I thought that was kind of unique. And I thought, well, we have this wonderful relationship with Basel, Germany, that we've celebrated 60-some years. And here's a neighborhood, roughly a 7-hour drive west on Interstate 70 and a right-hand turn away from us. Come to find out in my investigation that the residents of Hagerstown, Indiana came from Hagerstown, Maryland and the surrounding area. So we have bloodlines already. Again, I couldn't figure out, because of this information I've been finding, is why hasn't it been done before now? I think what it is, like I said, I'm not the first person that has thought about this, but there's been many people who have thought about it and even told me that, you know, I thought about that too, just never did anything with it. Well, I guess I'm the person that's going to push the snowball down the hill to get this thing going. When I met with Karen, we discussed it. She told me she thought it was a great idea. We in turn met with the mayor. The mayor thought it was a good idea as well. Karen asked me to reach out then to the folks in Indiana to get a feel for those folks to see what they thought of the idea as well. I spoke with Mr. Bob Warner, who is the town manager there. He was quite ecstatic about the idea. He also said, why hasn't this been done before? So I asked Mr. Warner if he would talk with his elected officials at his end of 70, and I would talk with the officials at this end of 70 and see if we could not get this to be a reality. So we both worked together in joining the members together to try to get this thing to move forward. I don't know if you have this yet in your possession. I'm going to pass these copies around. You'll see that I have a cross-section of individuals who I selected. The terminology I used was ambassadors. You can put any label on it that you want. But what it boils down to are groups of people who I think represent the city quite well in reference to what their occupations are and what they represent to the project and what they can create with the project with relationships from Hagerstown, Indiana. I'm very, very excited about the idea. I think there's all kinds of things that we can utilize in regards to joining the two communities together. Example, Mr. Warner has informed me that relatives from his family have come from Blair's Valley. I told him, like himself, I have relatives that come from Blair's Valley too. Mr. Warner, his wife, and another couple, a gentleman who is also on the council, Brian Longbonds, will be coming to this area at the end of September for Mr. Warner to attend his son's wedding in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. When he gets here, one of the things I want to do for him is to take him up to Blair's Valley, and let's see if we can't find some of his ancestors up there. But the idea of the project is it kind of comes full circle. The people from Indiana were here. They moved west. They liked our name. They kept the name. And I think it's about time that we get this project working. Somewhere along the line, if you look in your paperwork, I got to find where mine is, about 5 pages into your paperwork, there is something that talks about municipal partnerships at the bottom of the page. And you flip it over, because I couldn't get it all on that page. It says a municipal partnership is with Hagerstown, Maryland, U.S., unofficial. So at some point in time, somebody else had an idea about doing this too, but they just never carried through with it. I think it's about time that it happens. I think it's something exciting that a lot of people can participate in. The wonderful thing about this I see is we don't know what we don't know yet. When the word gets out there about this, if it's gets your approval, it gets out there and the general public starts finding out about Hagerstown, Indiana, we're going to have people coming forward. And in the letter that you have in your packet from Mr. Warner, it says that there's already some relationships who are starting to transpire through the citizens at his end. So there's interest there. What it will do for us is it will allow us as a group, as the mayor, as the council, as an interested citizen, and everybody else in this community to put our footprints in history. Where 50, 60 years down the road, from this point, when you're still celebrating the sister city with Wesel, Germany, you're also celebrating the sister city relationship with Hagerstown, Indiana. I can't seem to find what I'm looking for. I know it's in your packet. you'll see an article in there showing the patch of their police force. That's the same patch that the chief of police just sat down here and had on his uniform. When I talked to their senior deputy out there, he informed me, that's it right there. The senior deputy that I talked to said, up until recently, that was the patch that their police department used on their uniforms. Now, they just got a new chief of police, and he changed their patches. But up until that point, they were carrying our patches on their uniforms. And I thought that was kind of unique. They're excited. They want to reach out. You know, they want to accept the olive branch from us to make this a reality and to have this thing move forward. On the back page, I think it's the back page of your folder book, the back 2 pages, as a matter of fact, there's listings of organizations that we have, same thing. They have a Rotary Club, they have an American Legion, they have a Lions Club, and I have the current president of the Hagerstown Lions Club on my group. These are organizations that can reach out to each other and to exchange ideas and information and generate relationships. Something that I think is really unique is in their town, and this is a town of about 1,700 people. They have one elementary school, they have a junior, senior high school. Looking at your information as you flip back through the pages, you'll see little images of their town and their areas. It's kind of like a Norman Rockwell setting. It's a place you want to be. It's a place you want to spend time at. So this is something that I think needs to happen. It's long overdue. I'm asking each one of you to please jump on board and have the same vision that I do, so we can move forward with this project. I mentioned Mr. Warner's name earlier. He and his wife and the other couple are coming here for his son's wedding in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He'll be here at the end of September, the 29th, 30th of September, and the 1st of October. If we can agree on this project and decide to do this and make this a project that we're all going to feel great about, we can use the opportunity for him being here in that area, this area at that time. We can bring him before the city council on the 1st of October, and we can make it official at that point in time. So I hope you all have the same vision I do. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. So, please, let's see what we can do with this project.
So the question is, do we want to move forward with the project? If so, would it be okay to bring back something on October 1st when Mr. Warner is in town? And we see the setup similar to the Sister City Affiliation of Basil, where it's a separate group, and we work with them, though we don't structure the group, or we don't fund the group in some ways. Sometimes we partner with them.
Does anyone have any questions? I really appreciate your energy and enthusiasm behind this, Mr. Keifer, because I think, as Karen said, it is contagious. Any feedback from council members?
I'd just like to commend you, Mike. You've put an awful lot of work into this, an awful lot of thought into this, and taken the initiative. And you're to be congratulated.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Don't be surprised if CNN calls you pretty soon.
I will only accept that on behalf of everybody else who has had the same idea as I've had. Like I said, I'm not the first person to ever come up with this, because I've had people come to me and say, I thought about that before too. And these are people who have been to Hagerstown, Indiana. Mayor, yourself, you said you've been there. So I'm just thinking, okay, I don't know why it didn't happen before. I don't know why I'm the person that just played around on the computer one day to find out about Hagerstown's, but I'm glad I did. And I just think it's, this has got to happen.
Oh, it's called leadership.
Well, thank you very much.
Thumbs up,
Mike
everybody.
Mike knows how much I'm behind this project.
Yeah, what do you need from us?
Well, I'm just looking for your blessing. What I can say is this.
But specifically.
And every person that I talked to, the reply that I got back from them was all positive. I think Councilman Messner was one of the first ones that I called and talked to. Very ecstatic about it. And that just kind of spread to everybody else that I talked to. Everybody else was kind of waiting back in the wings for somebody to throw the curtain back and say, here it is. Okay?
It may be appropriate for us to send a correspondence to them back.
Per resolution.
Correct. And then also to research how to make it official. And I think that would be our next steps. And I know Linda Irvin Craig and Tom Reifert are two of our ambassadors here as well. And Dr. Wilcox, I mean, there's a lot of meetings, and everybody brought energy and their ideas to them.
Yeah, something I want to include, she doesn't know I'm going to do this, but I understand Pat Wishart is in the back of the room and she's at the library. My mind is running 1,000 miles an hour on this project, so I've got all kinds of things in my head. One of the things that I thought about was, we're having a brand-new library opening up October the 5th?
Yes.
Okay, unfortunately, Mr. Warner is going to be here October the 1st. I wanted to have a discussion with Pat in regards to, once we have the council's blessing in going forward with this, is to have an area in the library to where you could reserve space for information to display from Hagerstown, Indiana. If they're going to be our sister city, the people here need to know about Hagerstown, Indiana. And I'm sure we'll get the same type of response in Indiana in their, municipal building or what have you. Do you think that's feasible?
Certainly something we can talk about.
Thank you very much. That's what I was hoping to hear.
Well, we'd want to include Basil, though, if we did something like that.
Absolutely. That's part of the whole idea here. When the relationship from Basil was created, it was to explore our heritage and celebrate our heritage, okay? Well, now that we find out that people from Hagerstown, Indiana came from here, well, that's their heritage as well, okay? So we need to kind of bring this all together as a tri-city effort. But it has to come from this council this evening for everybody to say, this is something that we have to do, and let's do it, and let's make it happen, and everybody will feel good about it.
Well, it sounds like you're getting the green light tonight to move forward, and
So we'll do a correspondence.
Karen will work with you and the group to go on the next steps, and we'll look forward to a resolution here.
Right. Well, and I think we can authorize you to sign a letter indicating council's consensus. We don't need to.
Justice,
You can go ahead and sign a letter that state, work with the state.
just a suggestion, maybe you want to take Mr. Warner through our new library. I got a tour last Monday. It's glorious.
Don, that's one of the things I want to do.
That would be after he ate at the German restaurant.
We're going to have a meeting. Karen and I are going to have a meeting, and we're going to have a meeting with the people in my group here to give you a real quick photograph of what I want to happen in the 3 days that he's here. When I say he, I mean the group. There'll be 4 of them. The Sunday that he's here, I want to take him to Blair's Valley so he can explore and see if he can find some of his ancestors. Sure. I want to introduce him to Mr. Wiles, who's the president of the Historical Society there, to give him whatever kind of assistance he can give him there. I want to take him to Plum Rose, okay? I understand that the farm's only been owned by 2 families, the current owners and the ones previous to that. Their last names were Warner also. So we want to find out if there's any tie there, okay? Now, Monday and Tuesday, there's a lot of people on this list that I would like to see participate in showing off various sites and areas around our city. The Hager House, the Miller House, the museum, the library, the Maryland Theater.
Well, bring them to the council meeting then.
Well, the night that they're going to be here, October the 1st, that's the night I'm going to be able to introduce them to you folks so we can make it official at this end. That at some point in time, whether I'm going by myself or I got a busload of people, there's going to be a trip made to Hagerstown, Indiana. Now, something very exciting is that they have an annual celebration. They call it a Jubilee celebration, usually around the 16th and 17th of August every year. Okay? Well, we have our August Oberfest like a week after that. I can see in the future where we have an exchange of people enjoying each other festival. So, like I said, there's all kinds of things that can happen with this. Once the public finds out about it, people start coming forward and telling us information that we don't know yet, it's just going to be a great relationship.
Unlimited possibilities.
Unlimited.
Well, thanks again for your work on this. It
You're
really
quite
is to
welcome.
be commended, and I appreciate the support of the council in moving forward with this.
Thank you very much,
And
sir.
any resident or person that wants to get involved, they can contact our office and we'll get them matched up with Mike.
Right. Again, another thing that I want to do while he's here, and we're going to discuss it, is to have a welcoming dinner for them. Okay? And the idea behind that is this. We're thinking about 28 South. We'll approach the folks there. I will ask for them to comp the meal for the folks, the 4 folks. Everybody else in attendance will pick up their own tab. That way there's no funding requested from the city council and the city. I think we're going to have plenty of people interested in coming forward and being introduced to these folks and vice versa. And it'll be a good way to kick the relationship off.
Thanks again.
Mike, much of what we deal with, as you know, is problem after problem after problem. Thank you for bringing something that's so positive and upbeat.
Well, I sat back here listening to everything else that was going on prior to me coming forward. And I'm thinking to myself, and Karen made the same comment to me, and I thought about it before. It's going to be nice to put something out on the table that's going to be something very positive and people can get excited about
And don't
versus
cost any money.
business-oriented, and everybody has to battle back and forth about the pros and the cons. This is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
folks,
again.
thank you very much for your time.
Appreciate it.
Next up is the one.
Yes, the next item on the agenda is the Washington County Free Library street closure requests for the ribbon cutting and grand opening.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to take much of an effort here.
It is going to be October 5th, and we're asking for the closure from 10 to 4. That's going to include set up and tear down. Also, we'll be setting up about 500 chairs for the library. We've been working with a logistics group with the Washington County Library to make sure that everything would go smoothly and safely that day. And we're very proud to be part of it. We're a sponsor of it. We do have a line account in public functions budget that would take care of the city services. So with that, if we could have the street closure and approval, then we can go forward.
All in favor, thumbs up? Any thumbs downs? No. You got our approval.
Thank you. Thanks,
If
Pat.
only they could all be as easy as that. And the last item on the work session is an advisory on the neighborhood's first special event.
And Jennifer Fettig is coming up, and this is an idea from the Historic Heights Neighborhood's First group. They've put this together. It is an event on September 14th from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. To bring organizations together and then also to show off their streetscape and their architecture. Just to note that an event has been approved through the Neighborhood's First event approval process, which Sarah Nelson is here on that. And then we've also reviewed it logistically just to make sure that for safety and some traffic issues as well. And with that, we'll have Jennifer talk because it's all their idea.
Great. Welcome.
And there's no hooting. We talked about
No
that
hooting
during
from
the
porch
noise
to
ordinance.
porch?
You want to describe your event for us?
It's a porch fest, so we're closing the street from Washington to Park Circle. We've asked musicians to volunteer their time to play on the porches. A lot of musicians have come forward and are willing to do it for free. We've said they could put a hat out so they could try to make some money for the day. And the neighborhood has rallied, the whole neighborhood, which includes Summit and Walnut. And that's really all. Except, we have a map, and on the back of the map is our neighborhood, what we call the historic walk, going describing the architecture of a lot of the different houses. And then we're also putting signs on each of the houses. Some houses, the porches will be used for music, some they will not, but all of the houses that we have histories for will have a plaque out in front explaining the history of the house, what we have. And Georgia Boys Cafe is part And Georgia Boy, oh, I don't know if you know, I guess you probably know Georgia Boys doing their relaunch on September 9th. And then they're going to be selling food on the block, and they'll also have their, within the gates of within their parking lot, they're going to set up a drinks tent, so they can have it enclosed and give bands and sell drinks. And then as things kind of flow up and down the street with music, we'll try to flow them that way at the end, and they're going to have a band that night with their new restaurant.
Very nice.
Wow, that's the third good thing in a row.
I know.
That's great.
There's
It's super what you're doing.
I think this is a great idea generated by the Neighborhoods First group up there, and it's a way to show off not only the recent work that's been done, but all the work that all the property owners have done diligently in maintaining their properties, and it's a good way to show them off.
The houses speak for themselves in a lot of cases, but some people have done a lot of work also.
Yeah.
But you're not asking for a street closure.
We have.
They have, and
They have
approved
it,
through
they get it.
the through code department, so we do not have to approve it through this process.
That was the first thing that we did, and we just
Okay.
went through the route.
All right, because I didn't see it on here. I wondered.
Yeah,
how
it's
you were
like
gonna do
a block party closure.
that. Okay, good.
All right.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your efforts.
Yeah, I think you've got support here.
Thanks on behalf of everybody in the neighborhood.
All right.
I like this.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, we have our city administrator's comments.
Just a reminder that with Labor Day yesterday, the recycling trash collection schedule for everybody gets pushed back one day this week. So everybody's pushed back a day.
Council comments. Who would like to start? Mr. Metzner.
None for tonight, thank you.
Ms. Nye.
No, I don't have anything.
Mr. Munson.
I would like to point out that the Maryland Theater has recently painted the part over the box office. They've installed the signs, lower signs, and they've installed some of the windows. The place is looking great, so if you have a chance to swing by, it's something good that this council made happen, or helped make happen, I should say.
Thank you. Mr. Alshire. Mr. Brubaker.
No comments this evening.
Wow. Well, I just have a couple of short ones. Just a reminder to everybody that we are planning on having an executive session on Friday at 4 o'clock, up in room 407 with Bruce Quinn and the Hagerstown Sons. Also, this morning I met with Donna Brightman, member of the Board of Education, and she indicated to me that there is a willingness to get the two bodies together and break the rearview mirror and continue looking forward on projects we can partner with them. I've received also recently a letter from the board president inviting the city as a partner to share in their visioning process. So I'll make sure everyone gets a copy of that letter, and we can begin those conversations. With that, I will entertain a motion to go into executive session. The agenda has been posted. I think we have three items on today's executive session.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Munson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Brubaker. Any discussion? All those in favor of going into executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will now go into executive session following a 5-minute break.